People did disappear, and some turned up dead with their faces peeled. This boy had deep cuts under his jawline. Looked like gills were cut into his neck. It was very gruesome. There were two guys in these black armored bodysuits, and they were hovering on their boards. And Talia's laying there on the ground, bloodied up, and she's unconscious. And when the villagers came on the scene, these assailants, they went straight up into the sky. I mean, she would shake and cry. We were reminding her of her assailants. They also were in possession of what I can only describe as advanced aerospace vehicles. They all witnessed collectively a being walking in the jungle, shining. Now, who are they specifically? I don't know, but they're very nefarious. My name is Timothy Alberino. I'm an author, researcher, and explorer.
Let's talk about your investigation into these face peelers in Peru. Can you share with me some of the wildest and most credible stories you've heard from people there? In addition, what are these things and what do they want?
So back in 2023, there were a series of videos that went viral on social media, and these videos were captured in the Amazon jungle in a couple of different villages, specifically the village of, there was a video from the village of San Antonio de Pintuillacu that went viral all over the internet. And what it depicted was a group of the men of the village. It was the scene was night. It was nighttime, and the men of the village were frantically running around, discharging their firearms into the jungle. And they're yelling, they're screaming, they're obviously very agitated. And subsequent interviews with some of these gentlemen revealed that they had been assaulted by these mysterious people who some of the villagers were claiming were aliens, and these assailants were apparently could fly or at least float. One of the villagers described them being able to float a meter off the ground, and they were bulletproof because they were shot at point blank range and to no effect. And they were dressed in very strange body armor. The villagers said that they looked like the Green Goblin from the Spider-Man movie. And that they were they were flying around the jungle, and that they had attempted to abduct one of the young ladies in the village, a 15-year-old girl named Talia. So, and they were calling them pelacaras, face peelers. There is a legend in Peru, in the jungles of Peru, of these face peelers, the pelacaras, and the legend goes back to probably only to the 80s. After talking to the villagers out there, I learned that this legend only goes back to the 80s, to the mid-80s. And the face peelers are these mysterious assailants who from time to time show up, and they abduct villagers, and they either cut their faces off or they harvest their organs, depending on who you talk to. And it is believed, the opinion is different among different villagers, but most of the villagers believe basically that these are one of two things, that these face peelers, the pelacaras, are either A, gringos who are in possession of advanced technology and they're harvesting organs and faces for whatever reason, or B, they're extraterrestrials, they're non-human beings. And I found both of those opinions when I went out and investigated the situation, which I did in, I believe it was October of 2023. I went with my friend Doug Thornton, and I chartered a riverboat, and we made our way up the river. It took a couple of days to get up to this village. Very remote, by the way, this village, San Antonio de Pintuillacu. It's really the last village before endless jungle. And it's up the river. You go up the river Nanay. It's in the district of Nanay. And I should say that I lived in this part of Peru. Not exactly in San Antonio de Pintuillacu, but I'd been in the district of Nanay. I lived up the river Masan for quite some time when I was a young man, and so I'm very familiar with the Amazon, Peruvian Amazon. And so people were asking me, please go investigate this, and I decided, well, I was waiting to see if someone was going to go, and nobody was going. Nobody had gone to the village. Only 2 police officers from Iquitos, which is the city, the only city out there in that part of the Amazon. And that's where the Amazon begins, is the city of Iquitos. That's where there's a confluence of 3 rivers there, and that's how you get the Amazon River. So these 2 policemen went up the river, and they had a Navy escort, and they did an investigation, but it was very poorly conducted, their investigation. They really didn't investigate anything. They had to go because there was an attempted abduction of Talia. There was an attempted abduction, so they had to go investigate. And they determined that the villagers were being harassed by river miners wearing jetpacks. That was their determination. And that the river miners were trying to scare the villagers, maybe scare them off of their land. Understand that this is one of the oldest villages in the Amazon, in this part of the Peruvian Amazon. These are the Iquitu people, very ancient tribe. And so these police officers determine, yeah, it's just jetpack miners, which is absurd. Absurd, okay? This story, by the way, was spread all over the internet. Major news organizations like News Nation picked it up and ran with it. Oh, we understand. The mystery is solved. It's miners, river miners wearing jetpacks. That's that, and then that was it. That was it. Mystery solved. River miners with jetpacks. None of these people have ever encountered river miners in the Amazon. I have, and I can tell you they don't have jetpacks. The river mining operation on the Amazon is not. It's not like some multinational, or rather some transnational, well-funded operation. No, these river miners are floating around on these rickety, rusted-out boats or rafts, and they're dumping mercury into the water, and they're trying to extract gold they're dragging the bottom of the river, right? So they drop the mercury in to separate the gold from whatever other alloys it's connected to, and then they scrape the bottom of the river with machinery. It's very destructive. It kills all the fish. The villagers live on that water. They drink the water. It poisons the water. It's very, very destructive practice, and it's illegal. And again, these are not well-funded operations. These river miners, they're poor, basically. They don't have money for state-of-the-art jetpacks. And so when people realize that, the news people started saying, oh, they're probably funded by the cartels. That's absurd. Why would the cartels spend any money, first of all, buying this advanced technology for river miners for what purpose? To drive the Iquitu people off of their land so that they can dredge the river? Are they really going to find enough gold to justify the expense on these state-of-the-art jetpacks? I mean, it's absurd. It's stupid. And I knew it was stupid. And so I decided I'm going to go investigate this situation. This is nobody's doing the due diligence here to actually find out what's going on. So I went down there. I lived in Peru for 10 years, so I speak the language. Specifically, I speak what's called Charapa, which is the jungle dialect, and which is what they speak there. And I actually had an official invitation from the Apu, from the chief of the village, to come and conduct my investigation. And I decided to help them. I brought them some supplies. I brought them food. I brought them some technological instruments to help them because ever since these incursions had been happening, and by the way, the incursions were happening in July and all through July up into the beginning of August. The men of the village were having to be very vigilant. And they were conducting patrols every night, and the villagers were not going out into their farms, their chakras they call them. They were not going out to harvest food. Because they were afraid of the face peelers. So they were running out of food. They needed basic supplies, and I decided to help them. And it was Pastor Darren Tyler and some of the gentlemen from Conduit Church who helped me provision the village. Shout out to those guys. And so we went to the village, we supplied them, and we conducted an investigation. And what I discovered was this wasn't just a handful of people who've encountered these face peelers, these pelacaras. This was most of the village. Everybody had a story. And many of the stories were very extraordinary. Many of the stories were guys who shot at them point blank range. A few of the guys in the village encountered them point blank range, discharged the firearms, the shotguns, by the way, bird shot. And they described these assailants in great detail. They were tall. They all said they were taller than me, about a foot taller than me. I'm 6'1", so 7 foot tall, somewhere in that neighborhood. That they were dressed in black armored bodysuits from head to foot. They had helmets with eye lenses, almond-shaped eye lenses, and the helmets covered the entirety of their heads. They did have backpacks, but they were small. They weren't jetpacks. And the way that they were flying wasn't from the backpacks. Rather, they were surfing around on circular hoverboards. And this is how they were making incursions into the village. So the villagers, when these assaults would begin, the villagers would see these little UFOs flying around. And it's at nighttime, so they just see a circle of lights, a few of these things. No sound, totally silent. And sometimes, if they were close enough, they'd flash their flashlight and they'd see a guy surfing on top, right? And then the assailants would always come 2 by 2, and they would fly and land their hoverboards in the jungle, and then they would enter the village through the jungle. And they would land the hoverboards, disembark, and then they would walk into the village. And when they walked into the village, sometimes they would be seen by the people. They were trying to be covert. I think they had some stealth technology. And the way that they moved was described to me by one gentleman as they were inhumanly agile, because he and some of the other guys chased one of them. They were very menacing. There's a lot of different stories that I could tell you from the villagers, but they attempted to abduct Talia, the 15-year-old girl, and that's a very long story. But suffice it to say, they were unsuccessful because they dropped her. They landed in her backyard right at dusk, and they grabbed her, and they on their discs, on their hoverboards, they grabbed her and flew her over to this one spot, and they started to cut her neck, right, assumedly to cut her face off, and she started to struggle, and one of them slapped her in the face, and they dropped her, and she screamed. And remember, this wasn't the first incursion, so the men of the village are vigilant. They've got their rifles, and they've got their shotguns and their flashlights. And so when she screamed, they came running, including her brother. And a handful of the villagers witnessed the assailants. There were 2 guys in these black armored bodysuits, and they were hovering on their boards. And Talia's laying there on the ground, bloodied up, and she's unconscious. And when the villagers came on the scene, these assailants, they went straight up into the sky. They shot up into the air on their hoverboards. And so this was happening for a month. These incursions were happening. The villagers are freaking out. And I interviewed Talia. She had severe PTSD. I actually gave her father some money to take her to a clinic to see a psychiatrist in Iquitos, because she had severe PTSD. I mean, she would shake and cry whenever she was in my presence and Doug's, because we were gringos, we're tall. We were reminding her of her assailants. I interviewed dozens of people from the village. They all told me different stories, and an important detail in these stories is not only did they have these state-of-the-art hoverboard things, silent, they also were in possession of what I can only describe as advanced aerospace vehicles. And they look like acorns, like if you take an acorn and put it on its side and you look up at it. So not vertical acorns, but like a sideways acorn. And these craft were, the size of a private jet, but they didn't look like a jet. They were shaped like an acorn. And roughly, and I had a couple of the villagers, a few of them drew them for me. They all drew the same thing, sort of a delta-shaped craft, but rounded, like an acorn, and the back was wider. And these craft were silent. They would hover over the village. And one of the guys described it as being translucent, transparent. He could see like a mesh, transparent mesh. He saw 2 guys inside of it. And he was pulling up his nets at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and suddenly he said it's like someone turned the lights on, or like the sun came up, and he's by himself on the river, and he looks up and there's this craft above him, shining a light down on him. And the craft is only about 40 feet above him, and he can see inside the craft. You can see two guys in there. And the craft didn't make any noise. It was hovering silently. And he said it had these little protrusions that opened up. And when they opened up, they were like the craft didn't have any wings. It had like little stubs, basically, for wings. Now, I've seen something similar to this. And those little stubby protrusions opened up. They folded open. And he said when they opened up, there was like a series of lights, like they were scanning. And then they closed. And then the craft started to move away. He said when the craft started to move away, he heard like a low frequency humming sound. Okay, multiple people saw these craft on different occasions. One lady drew the exact same thing and said she saw it right above her house, but it wasn't translucent when she saw it. And these assailants, I was told, they had extraordinary abilities. They could jump over the houses, the huts. They could literally leap over the huts. And they were very stealthy. But what are they? Well, some of the villagers think they're aliens. Some of the villagers think they're gringos with advanced tech. I personally think at this point that these are human beings wearing exosuits. They're physically enhanced, and they're in possession of advanced aerospace vehicles. Now, who are they specifically? I don't know, but they're very nefarious. I visited the city of Nauta. Nauta was experiencing some of the same phenomena. Now here, this is very important to understand because Nauta is not a little village. Nauta's back towards, when I concluded my investigation in San Antonio de Pintuillacu, I went back to Iquitos, and there's only one place you can get to from Iquitos by road. That's Nauta. Nauta's about a 40-minute drive west from Iquitos. And to get to Iquitos, you have to fly or you have to take a boat. There's no roads that go there. So Iquitos itself is out in the jungle, right? So Nauta, when I went to Nauta, I wanted to investigate a particular situation associated with the face peeler stuff. I learned that there was a boy, and actually you could see this. I have a video of this on my YouTube channel, by the way. All of this is covered in great detail on my YouTube channel. There was a boy, there was an attempted abduction by a face peeler. But like in the Talia case, some people actually, I should have said, did disappear, and some turned up dead with their faces peeled. So that happened. This individual, this boy, I think he was about 12 years old, 13 years old. Like Talia, the operation was interrupted, the abduction was interrupted, and the boy was saved. But this boy had deep cuts under his jawline. Looked like gills were cut into his neck. And in Peru, they put everything on TV. So, like, in Peru, if there's a car accident, the whole gory mess ends up on TV. The dead people, the blood, the whole thing. People who've had their hands dismembered, cut off, everything goes on television, right, in Peru. So they showed this boy, and I think I blurred it in my video. It's very gruesome. But he's got these deep cuts in his neck, and his skin is just sort of flapping there like gills. And he's sitting there and this was published on the news, the video in Peru. And the boy's just sitting there in the clinic in shock. Obviously, he lost a lot of blood. He's very pale. Thankfully, they were able to save his life. They sewed him up and gave him a transfusion, and not a transfusion, rather they gave him blood, and he survived. So it wasn't just happening in San Antonio de Pintuillacu. There was heightened UFO activity, by the way. People were seeing UFOs. A group of college students were out there in the jungle doing some sort of a project. They all witnessed collectively a being walking in the jungle, shining, and there's pictures of that online. So when I was in Nauta, there was a particular case I wanted to investigate, and I went and found the location and did an investigation there. And I learned from the people I was interviewing in Nauta that the very same phenomenon was happening in Nauta, that on the outskirts of town, there were these people who were flying on discs, dressed in full-body armored dressed in armored bodysuits, or the helmets. Same thing as in San Antonio Pintuillacu. Now, why is this important? Well, it totally destroys the narrative that this was miners with jetpacks trying to drive the villagers off of their lands so they could mine the river, because San Antonio Pintuillacu has about 200 inhabitants. Nauta, I think, has like 9,000 inhabitants or something like that. I don't remember the exact figure. No. Nauta has 30-some thousand inhabitants. And it has military base. There are helicopters there. There are the Navy is there. This isn't some little village anymore. So this isn't miners with jetpacks trying to drive people out of a village. This is Nauta. Okay, they've got the army is there, the army, the Navy, and there's a large police presence. Okay, so there's automatic weapons in play now. There's helicopters, there's boats with machine guns on them, and they're having the same phenomenon. But in Nauta, I was told that they were seeing flying saucers as well. Yeah, so that's actually just a very, very brief description of what was going on out there. I published, for those who are interested, on my YouTube channel, it's just my name, Timothy Alberino. My featured video right now on my YouTube channel is my expedition brief, my expedition report of this entire thing. And you can see the video, you can see me interviewing people, you can see the images, the original videos that were uploaded to social media. It's all there in that video. But that's it in a nutshell.
Your work often delves into pre-Adamic past and a cosmic war. Could you paint a picture for our audience of what this ancient conflict was about and how it sets the stage for humanity's story?
We're going to frame this in within the biblical narrative, because that's the backdrop of the way that I talk about this. So, there's a notion that when you open up your Bible, you open up to the first chapter, Genesis, and you begin to read about the Adam and Eve and the story that ensues. And most Christians are under the impression that that's the beginning of the universe. This is where everything begins. The universe and mankind, the universe, the earth, and mankind basically come into existence in a very short sequence. In other words, everything is sort of birthed at the same moment, the cosmos and humanity. And I think that this is an erroneous perception. This is not a good way to interpret the story. Rather, I think that when we open the beginning of Genesis, what we're looking at is the beginning of our story, not the beginning of the cosmic story, rather the beginning of our part in the story. And it is not our story. So let me clarify that. So it's the beginning of our part in the story, but the story is not about mankind. There's two very different, very conflicting perspectives that most Christians have. One of two perspectives. Most Christians actually have the first perspective, which is the anthropocentric perspective of the universe. And in the anthropocentric perspective, mankind is the center of all things. So if you envision the universe like a wheel, and in the center of that wheel, the hub of the wheel, that's the purpose. That's the purpose of the universe. That's the focus of everything that's happening in the universe. And from the anthropocentric perspective, mankind is in the center of that wheel. We are the focus of everything that's unfolding in the universe. And again, this is the perspective that is most commonly adopted by Christians. And it happens to be biblically incorrect. It's not the correct doctrinal view. Rather, the correct doctrinal view is what's called it's called the Christocentric perspective, that Christ is the center of all things. He is in the center of that wheel. He is at the hub of the wheel. The universe was created through him and by him and for him, and in him all things consist. So it's his story. It's not our story. We are ancillary characters in someone else's story. And it happens to be the story of the Son of God. And we and all of the other sentient beings in the universe are playing a part in the unfolding of his story. That's a different view. That's an entirely different view. It's not a nuance. Because if mankind is the center of the universe, from the anthropocentric view, everything is focused on planet Earth. There's a very limited amount of players in the game, so to speak. Most Christians can only contemplate a handful of characters: God, angels, God, angels, fallen angels, demons, and humans. That's pretty much the cast of characters that are allowed for in a conventional Christian worldview, which again I do not believe is the biblical worldview. But if you approach this from a Christocentric perspective, then we have no idea what other sentient life is in the universe, because we're simply not told. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're not told about in the Bible. The purpose of the scriptures is to convey the gospel of Christ, not to inform us about everything that's going on in the universe. The purpose of the scriptures is not to inform us about quantum physics, quantum mechanics. It's not to inform us about electromagnetism. It's not to inform us about the germ theory of disease. It's just not. It's to convey a message to mankind. That's the purpose of the Bible, is to convey a message. And the message has to do with the gospel of Christ. And that's the primary thrust of the message. And so for me, it's very, this bears upon the way that we engage with the biblical narrative, because when you, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, you open up the book of Genesis, and for most Christians, this is the beginning of everything. This is where everything begins. Boom, the universe, mankind, we all kind of get going together, right? The animals, the plants, the angels, everything begins in basically the same cosmic moment. I don't believe that that's the narrative at all. In fact, as I said, when you open up Genesis, it's the beginning of our part in the story. So the question is, what happened before our part in the story? And I think that we're given the intimations of what happened before are right there. The earth is in a state of tohu vabohu. It's careening in this state of ruination. It's desolate. It's empty. And the terminology in the Hebrew, tohu vabohu, that's used to describe this condition of planet Earth is one that's used of calamity in the aftermath of judgment. So when we open that first chapter, we're seeing the end of the last chapter and the beginning of a new chapter. And our story is not chapter 1. Our story is somewhere, who knows, it's in the middle of the book, or perhaps near the end of the book. It's not in the very beginning. It's the beginning of our story, but it is not the beginning of the universe. And so what preexisted us? Well, we know, according to the biblical narrative, that mankind is preexisted by who I denominate in my book Birthright, the elder race. We are preexisted by the sons of God. The angels, they preexist us. They are both preexistent and preeminent. Preexistent because they existed in the universe before us, this is clear in the scriptures, and preeminent because mankind was created to be a little lower than the heavenly beings. So all of this is evident in the narrative itself, in the text, in the biblical narrative, but we have adopted an anthropocentric perspective of the cosmos, and we have our own idiosyncratic view of all of this from a Western perspective. We have a Western idiosyncratic view of the biblical narrative, which is skewed. It's based on tradition. It's based on I would say in some cases, to some extent, a medieval understanding of the story. And so what happened before mankind? A war happened, a conflict, a rebellion, an insurrection. And it led to the destruction, I believe, of a planet that used to be in our solar system. Now it's the debris field between Mars and Jupiter. And that planet, I believe, is named in the scriptures Rahab, and it was destroyed during a conflict between an insurrection in the kingdom of heaven, so an insurgency led by this character that's never actually named in the Bible. He's very much like Voldemort in the Harry Potter series. It's he who should not be named. He's never actually given a name. We have derived a name, Lucifer, from the Latin Vulgate, but this is a misnomer. This comes exclusively from the Latin Vulgate. The name Lucifer is actually not the name of this archenemy that's portrayed in the scriptures. He's never given a name. He's just referred to by various monikers: the devil, the adversary, the Satan, the dragon, That's serpent of old. And it's this character who was central to the events that unfolded before the creation of mankind, and this character who fomented insurrection in a pre-Adamic age and was defeated. He was all of this, by the way, the intimations of all of this are in the Old Testament, of this cosmic conflict. Our part in the story is directly resultant from what precedes us. So it's not random. Our appearance in the story isn't random. God just didn't randomly decide to create a new sentient species in the universe and to give them dominion of the earth. This is in consequence of something that happened before us. In the book of Job, we read that he puts no trust in his holy ones. In other words, the disposition of the king when mankind was created is something happened among the other sons of God. It's time to now create a new son of God, a new member in the family, and to entrust this new family member, this new son, with the dominion of a planet that is going to be restored. That's the beginning of the story. The earth is going to go through a process of restoration. Life is going to be reseeded on the earth. Dominion of this planet is going to be handed over to a new kind of creation in the universe. Not just any creation, a son of God, Adam, who's in the family. He's a member of the family, of the divine family. He's being handed dominion of the earth in the aftermath of this rebellion and ruin that was wrought in the cosmos during the insurrection of the dragon. I believe that is the correct perspective of how our story begins. And so we sort of take the baton at that point from our elder siblings, from the elder race, who I believe were governing in the solar system. In other words, I think that, let's say Rahab, Mars, some of these other planets were inhabited, the Earth possibly as well, inhabited by a non-human. We could define them quite accurately as extraterrestrial, angelic beings before this insurrection. And everything was laid waste in the cosmos, including the earth. The mountains melted like wax. There's a particular verse. There's a number of verses in the Psalms. I don't have them in front of me here. I didn't know we were going to talk about this, but there's a particular verse in the Psalms that depicts the earth as a spectator to this cataclysmic event that occurred before the creation of mankind, in which the mountains melt like wax. So, and I don't think that that's metaphoric. I think that the mountains literally melted like wax. And what would do that? How about the implosion of a planet in our solar system? And I think there's evidence for this all over the solar system. It would have caused the cratering on Mars and on the Earth. I mean, if you strip the oceans away, and the Earth has quite a lot of cratering as well. And obviously the moon and the other bodies in our solar system are riddled with craters. They were just bombarded. And something happened. Something cataclysmic happened in the solar system. And again, I think that the Bible gives us intimations of what that something was. It was literally a cosmic battle. And we're talking about a kinetic battle, not some sort of spiritual, supernatural war. A kinetic battle erupted between the king of heaven and the insurgency who rose up against him following the dragon. And that's part of our story. I mean, this is a through narrative that goes all the way from Genesis to Revelation. It ends, in fact, with the defeat of this character, the dragon, and who I think is ultimately, the person that is defeated with the dragon is the Antichrist, this person we describe as the Antichrist, who I believe is going to be his hybrid offspring.
The Book of Enoch is a big deal in your work. For folks who haven't heard it, who exactly were these watchers, and what big rule did they break? And what are the Nephilim, the giant offspring, still doing, or what's their impact on the world today?
Well, the Book of Enoch is quite controversial, especially today. I published a version of Enoch with Nate and Luke from Blurry Creatures, and I wrote an introduction and commentary. And ever since we published that book, we kind of lit a firestorm of controversy. Enoch has been controversial for a long time. It sort of disappeared from it absolutely did disappear from the scriptoriums of Europe and of the Middle East back in the 5th century. But it was preserved in Ethiopia. It was preserved both by the Beta Israel Jews and the Tawahedo Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia, both of whom inducted the Book of Enoch into the canon, into their respective canons, rather. So to this day, if you travel to Ethiopia and you go to an Orthodox church, the Book of Enoch is in their canon and has been since, the 5th century and the 5th or 6th century, and likewise with Beta Israel Jews in Ethiopia. There was a lot of debate among the early church fathers in regard to the authenticity of the Book of Enoch. Most of the church fathers, actually most of the ones that we're very familiar with, such as Athanasius, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, probably half a dozen to 6 to 8 different church fathers, prominent, who were quoted the Book of Enoch as scripture. They were referencing the Book of Enoch as scripture. Tertullian argued, in fact, that it was scripture and that the only reason it was rejected by the Jews was because it testified of the man they had crucified. Ultimately, it was rejected from the Christian canon, probably primarily for 2 reasons. One, because it was rejected by the Jews, and secondly, because the authorship was unknown. They couldn't verify the authorship. And there was no, as far as we know, there was no Book of Enoch in Hebrew that was circulating at the time. It was either in Greek or Aramaic or a combination of both. Probably there was an original copy of the Book of Enoch in Hebrew, and it would have been different than what we have today. We have, First Enoch today, the Ethiopian First Enoch, but clearly there was a version of the Book of Enoch circulating in the early church age that was different. It was similar in many of the verses, many of the chapters were identical, but there were certainly some differences because the church fathers quote passages out of it that we don't have today. So they were looking at a different manuscript than we have today. So there's a lot of controversy about the Book of Enoch, and I'm not interested personally in whether or not the Book of Enoch should be canonized. That's irrelevant to me. I'm only interested in what parts of it are true. And from a theological perspective, you cannot separate the Book of Enoch from the Old Testament. It's impossible because it undergirds so much of the cosmology of the ancient Hebrews. And you cannot, neither can you separate it from the New Testament because it undergirds so much of the theology, especially the eschatology and the Christology of the writers of the New Testament. Jesus references, he makes indirect references to the Book of Enoch. Of course, the Book of Enoch is quoted verbatim in Jude. Jude literally copy and pastes the first verses from the first chapter of First Enoch into his epistle. So there's a long tradition. The Book of Enoch is a long tradition among ancient Christians and ancient Jews. I believe that were you to enter the synagogues of Jerusalem and Judea in the 1st century AD, before the destruction of the temple, you would have found in their scriptoriums, you would have found some version of what we call today First Enoch. Now, it should be understood, though, that First Enoch is it's a complicated text. It's a compilation of texts. It's not one author. That's obvious. And not all of the parts, not all of its various portions, sections were written at the same time. It has clearly several authors, and the earliest portions of Enoch are indisputably written before Christ, which that's very important, and we'll get to why in a minute. Namely, the earliest portions being the book of the Watchers, which tells the story that you referenced, and the book of Parables. The latter portions of Enoch are written after most likely written after the birth of Christ, and they're more in line with the traditions of Merkaba mysticism, Jewish mysticism. So it's a very complicated text, and that's why people often ask me, well, do you think the Book of Enoch is true? Well, which part of the Book of Enoch? Because it's not a zero-sum game. It's not, there's no binary choice here. I don't allow myself to be constrained into a binary choice of true or false as it pertains to things like this that are so complicated. Parts of it are true, I think, and parts of it are probably not as authentic in regard to their content, are much more fantastical, and again, in line with Jewish mysticism. So having said all of that, the Book of the Watchers, which is the first section in the Book of Enoch, is the narrative portion of the book. This story is about the descent of these 200 angelic beings called Watchers. The Watcher denomination is not exclusive to the Book of Enoch. In other words, it's not extra-biblical. It's actually in the Book of Daniel. And the Watcher denomination in Daniel, it's very important because in Daniel, this is during that scene in which Nebuchadnezzar is being judged, and he's given the mind of a beast. And some of your listeners may remember this, he's given the mind of the beast, and he eats grass, and he basically lives like a wild animal for a period of time. This was a judgment, but who passed judgment? Who determined this judgment? It wasn't God. It was the holy watchers. So this was a council of holy watchers who sentenced Nebuchadnezzar to have a mind of a beast for a period of time. So these are obviously very important. These are the good guys in Daniel, the watchers, and they're seated in judgment against Nebuchadnezzar. Now, when we get to when we interact with the Book of Enoch, we find the same group, the watchers. We find an insurrectionary company of 200 watchers who decide that they're going to do something that they know is a great sin, that they know is going to kindle the ire of the King of Heaven. And what they decide to do is to descend to the earth and to engage in some very specific objectives that they want to accomplish. And in the Book of Enoch, we're given three. There are three objectives. The first two objectives are actually mentioned. The third is inferred. So the first objective is that the watchers, they're observing the women of earth, and they see that they're fair, that they're beautiful. And of course, this is where the reference comes from in Genesis 6, that the women of earth, the daughters of Adam, are comely, and they lust after these women. Okay, so they're desiring these women, but they're not just lusting. They want to take them as wives. That's the first motivation of the watchers. They want to take these women as wives. Then, they don't just want to, copulate, have sex with these women. They specifically say in the Book of Enoch that they intend to create children, to procreate children, offspring through these women. Okay, so that's the second motivation. And I think the third motivation is inferred. It's not directly stated, it's inferred. And I believe that the third and final motivation, and probably the most important, is they want to take dominion of the earth from the offspring of Adam. But they can't do it themselves because Adam was given, God bequeathed dominion of the earth to Adam and his offspring forever. And God, the armies of heaven enforce that dominion. So the watchers, they have to do this legally, so to speak. And in order to take dominion of the earth, the only way they can accomplish this legally is to produce hybrid offspring who are human enough to inherit Adam's dominion and to inherit it through his genome. Because dominion of the earth is not merited by the righteous. Rather, it's inherited by the offspring of Adam, good, bad, or indifferent. So the watchers, they descend to the earth with these objectives in mind. And again, it's very important to understand that they know that this is an infraction against the kingdom of heaven. And these are good guys before they're bad guys, right? And there's 200 of them. They descend to the earth, and specifically they descend to the summit of Mount Hermon, and when they get there, they take an oath. They bind themselves by mutual imprecations that, we're all in this together. We're all going to suffer the consequences. Whatever befall, we're in this together. We're binding ourselves together. So we all either stand or fall together, right? To this day, Hermon is known to the inhabitants who have traditions going back into the ancient world as the mountain of oath. and has been known as the Mountain of Oath since time immemorial. So once they bind themselves by mutual imprecations, they descend into the plains around Hermon, and they inconspicuously walking through the villages, through the towns, and observing the populations and choosing for themselves wives. Each one chose one wife. Okay, they're not running down into the villages and grabbing women and raping them. They're strategically choosing. Each watcher is choosing for himself a woman, a maiden that he's going to wed. Now, remember that this is a Mesopotamian patriarchal society, and that means that the women didn't have any say in who they were going to marry. It was the father. And so if you wanted to marry a maiden, and this was true even in the medieval times and throughout most of human history, actually, if you wanted to marry a maiden, you had to approach the maiden's father, and you had to offer that father something. You had to offer something to the father in exchange for the hand of his daughter, of the maiden. And this is precisely what the Watchers do. They knew that the sons of Adam, I think specifically the sons of Cain, by the way, were striving. There was a certain knowledge that they were striving to learn, and this is what it says in the book of Enoch. They were striving to learn something, right? They had a particular field of knowledge that they wanted information about. The Watchers knew this, and so they approached the fathers of the maidens that they wanted to marry, and they made a bargain. It turned out to be a Faustian bargain, but they made a bargain. You give us your daughter's hands in marriage, and in exchange, we are going to teach you this knowledge that you want to learn, that you're striving to learn. And the Watchers would have been gods walking among men. I mean, they would have seemed like gods walking among men. And I think that in regard to their appearance, I think they look like us, more magnificent than us. But rather, I think it's much more accurate to say that we look like them. These are members of, again, what I call the elder race, these ancient, exceedingly ancient, pre-existent, preeminent beings from the kingdom of heaven. And they're probably a little taller than us. They're much fairer than us in regard to their physical appearance. I don't think these are lizard people. I don't think these are reptilians or demonic-looking creatures. Remember, these are the holy Watchers. They make this bargain. They strike this bargain with men, with the fathers of these maidens, and this is done within the context of a legal contract. This is a marriage. This is matrimony. Matrimony is a contract. It's a covenant. So they make a covenant with the men, and they're doing this purposely because they know that, again, this is a great infraction, and there's going to be hell to pay. So they have to walk this fine line to where they're making a legal transaction with the governors of the earth, with the vice regents of planet Earth, with the sons of Adam. And if we have dominion of the earth, if we're the vice regents of this planet, then we have the authority to bargain with extraterrestrial beings, should we be given the opportunity. And by the way, I think we are still today. So obviously, this was a bad idea, and it led to calamity because the women, the Watchers, after they wed their wives in the covenant of marriage, they copulated with them. The women conceived and gave birth to giants, and the giants grew grew exceedingly large. They began to devour all of the acquisitions of the land. In other words, they were eating all the food. Men were forced to feed them because these are the offspring of the gods, okay? And there's a couple of things we ought to understand about, and these are the Nephilim, by the way. And there's a couple of things we need to understand about them. A, they must be highly intelligent. I mean, they have to be physiologically, biologically speaking, more magnificent than mankind because their fathers are the Watchers, and they're inheriting the genes from that side of the gene pool, from their fathers, and their mothers are the daughters of Adam. They're human women. So these are magnificent beings. They're not big, dumb oafs carrying clubs around. These are not the Disney giants, okay? These are highly intelligent and I think also quite nefarious beings. And so they're probably being worshipped. The Watchers surely are being worshipped as gods. Their offspring is demigods. Now, as the gods walking among men, men are being forced to come and venerate them and feed them. Obviously, this is a very difficult task. I don't know how many giants there were, but if each Watcher procreated at least one giant, there's at least 200 of them, and I think there were many, many more. But 200 massive giants, and these people have to feed them, with insatiable appetites, and the regular-sized people have to feed them. And they can't satiate their appetites, and they're eating all of the acquisitions of the land. And so when the human beings can no longer feed the giants, what do the giants do? They begin to devour mankind. And this is the origin of cannibalism in Jewish and Hebrew cosmology, because they're part human, and they're consuming their own kind. So, but I don't. What I see unfolding here is, and this isn't explicitly said in the text, but I think that we can infer that something like this is going on. I believe that what we have is an empire. What I define as the empire of the gods. You have the Watchers, who are the gods, who are these illustrious beings cohabitating the earth with mankind, and they divide the earth up. They apportion the earth among themselves, and each one takes for himself an allotment and establishes his own kingdom. And they're in alliance with each other. So this is an empire. And their offspring, the Watchers, become the kings, the potentates of each of their kingdom. Because remember, the Watchers themselves do not have authority to govern the earth, but their hybrid offspring do. So they set up an empire. And the human populace of planet Earth is subjugated to the gods and their offspring. I think this is literally what happened in the antediluvian world. So if we were to go back in time, I think 12,000 plus years ago, we would find ourselves in a world that looks vastly different to our own, in which the gods are walking among men, their hybrid offspring, who happen to be giants, are governing these kingdoms, and it would be very different than the Neolithic cavemen that were accustomed to imagining inhabiting the earth at that period of time. So I believe this is the lost civilization that was destroyed in the antediluvian world, and I don't believe that, and I'm kind of wandering all over the place here, but I don't believe that when we talk about a lost civilization from the antediluvian world, I don't believe that the average person was in possession of advanced technology. We need to understand that the antediluvians were incredible people. These were high caliber human beings, much higher caliber than us. They're closer to the source, to Adam. They're living much longer than we are. They're using more of their brains. They're physically more robust than we are. They're closer to the source. We are degenerate, crappy versions of Adam. We have degenerated over the thousands of years since our original progenitor, Adam. And we have accumulated in the course of this degeneration what's called a mutational load, deleterious mutations that have accumulated, deleterious meaning negative mutations. See, evolution happens in reverse. So I believe in the theory of evolution, but backwards. Everything began good and pure and genetically pure and is now degrading, gradually degrading, and has been for thousands of years. So it's evolution in reverse. We're still human beings. We're just broken down, crappy versions of Adam because of genetic degeneration. So those members of our species living in the antediluvian world were remarkable human beings, remarkable. And so, but nevertheless subjugated to the Nephilim and to their divine fathers, to the Watchers. And, this narrative of this empire of the gods is depicted by the Greeks. The Greeks tell the same story. Plato, in the Timaeus and Critias dialogue, this is where we get the famous account of Atlantis. He depicts Solon of Athens having this conversation with the priests of Sais in Egypt. And the priests are telling Solon the story of Atlantis. And they tell him that the story begins thusly, that the gods, Poseidon and all the gods, were dividing the earth amongst themselves. And each one took for his allotment a particular area of the earth and began to build his kingdom. And for his allotment, Poseidon received the region of Atlantis. And so then Poseidon then builds this island, and he proceeds to build his kingdom, right? And what happens next in that story? Well, Poseidon becomes enamored of a human woman named Cleito, and he weds this woman and then copulates her, and she conceives and gives birth to 5 sets of male twins. And Plato doesn't reveal this, but other sources reveal that these are giants. They're 10 twins. She gives birth to 10 gigantic twins. And these become the 10 kings of Atlantis. And we know, their king, the chief among them was Atlas, who is depicted as a giant by the ancient Greeks. And Atlantis is an empire. It begins as a kingdom. It's the kingdom of Poseidon. So Poseidon is he's the god, right? He's the deity over Atlantis. Who's the king of Atlantis? According to the Greeks, his offspring, these 10 kings, and chief among them, Atlas. So then what happens is Atlantis, it begins as a noble kingdom, and it's very, very advanced in science and knowledge and benevolent, but gradually becomes corrupted and becomes very antagonistic and begins a campaign of conquest against its neighbors. And it's steamrolling all of the other nations around, all of the other kingdoms around it, until it encounters the Athenians. Who established the kingdom of Athens? Athena, the goddess Athena. It's the same story. So this is the empire of the gods. But in Plato's story, they're going to war with each other. So the empire is in civil war. And the Atlanteans are fighting the Athenians. And what happens in the midst of this conflict? Cataclysm. Cataclysm ensues. And not just Atlantis, but everyone is destroyed in the cataclysm. So let's go back to the Book of Enoch. Well, this is the same story from the Book of Enoch. You have the Watchers and their offspring dominating the earth. Again, the empire of the gods. Each Watcher has his own kingdom, ruled over by his giant offspring, and they're oppressing mankind until mankind begins to petition heaven and ask for redress, pleading for redress for the Watchers and the Nephilim and all of the great evil being wrought on earth, because the knowledge that the Watchers gave mankind corrupted men. It was corrupting, and much bloodshed ensued on the earth. Just like in Daniel, the petition of mankind is brought to the courts of heaven. And Enoch is chosen to be the intermediary between the court of heaven, the Watchers in heaven, and the insurrectionary Watchers on earth, the rebels on earth. Enoch is the intermediary. Enoch is sent to the rebel Watchers, the insurrectionary Watchers, to inform them that God is going to judge them. And the Watchers are very distressed about this, the bad Watchers, and they draw up a petition. They want to ask God for clemency, for forgiveness, and for themselves and their offspring, the giants. And Enoch takes their petition and delivers it to the court of heaven. Now, he doesn't go to heaven. This all happens in the context of a dream with Enoch. So he's interacting physically with the Watchers on earth, and then he goes and he reads the petition, and he falls asleep. He reads the petition, I believe, by the brook of Dan, and he falls asleep. And then as he's dreaming, God gives him the answer to the petition. Then he wakes up, and he goes back to the Watchers, and he finds the Watchers weeping at a place called Abis-Jael, which I think is Baalbek, by the way. And the Watchers are weeping, and Enoch reads the judgment. And the judgment is severe. And the judgment is you're going to be bound, and God is going to force you to watch the destruction of your beloved children, the giants. And what that means is the destruction of your empire and the destruction of your sons. And then he's going to cause, and as part of this destruction, he's going to cause the giants, the Nephilim, to rise up against each other and to destroy each other in battle. So this isn't giants beating each other on the heads with clubs. This is kinetic warfare between kingdoms. Kingdoms are rising against each other. Kingdoms governed by the Nephilim are going to war with each other. And again, this is mirroring the story of Atlantis, right? And they go to war with each other, and the Watchers are forced to watch the destruction of their sons. And as the giants die, as they perish in battle, as part of the judgment, their spirits, they're cursed, their spirits proceed from their bodies and are stuck in this limbo, this curse between life and death. And the spirits of the giants are forced to wander the earth as disembodied vagabond spirits. And they're going to have all of the desires of the flesh. They're going to be hungry. They're going to be thirsty. Presumably, they're going to have all of the sexual urges, but with no physical bodies through which to fulfill these desires. It's a hellish condition, right? And these become the unclean or evil spirits, the demonic spirits that we encounter in the New Testament. The Greeks have the same mythology. They say that the demons, the daimones, are the disembodied spirits of the people who lived in the pre-flood world, of the mighty ones who lived in the pre-flood world. So it's a one-to-one, it's almost a one-to-one mirror here between what the Greeks believed and what the book of Enoch describes. And of course the giants, they destroy each other in battle, and probably in the midst of this battle, what happens? Cataclysm ensues, the great flood. And the empire of the gods is brought to ruin. So that's in a nutshell. There's a lot more details, but that's in a nutshell what the story of Enoch, what the Enochian tale relates. And it undergirds, that story undergirds so much of what's going on in the Old Testament. And then the following chapter in Enoch, the following section, the book of parables, undergirds so much of the Christology and eschatology in the New Testament. So I believe that the book of the Watchers and that the book of parables, both of those are authentic and true. And the book of parables, by the way, has some of the most astounding, some of the most remarkable Christological prophecies. The oracles of Enoch are primarily concern the Son of Man. And so it's the revelation of Jesus Christ before the birth of Christ. In the book of Revelation, we're told, the angel tells John that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And so if in the book of parables we have the testimony of Jesus, of the Son of Man, before he's born into the world, then it is self-authenticating. It's a self-authenticating message, because the prophecies were fulfilled in one, Jesus of Nazareth. Precisely. I believe, as I said, the book of Enoch is a compilation of texts, that's known, with several authors, that's known. So I don't take it or leave it as true or false. I separate out the earliest portions, which were written before the birth of Christ, namely the book of the Watchers and the book of parables, and I believe that those earlier sections of Enoch are self-authenticating the book of the Watchers, because the story it's evidently, obviously undergirds so much of the Old and New Testament, and the book of parables because it testifies of Jesus accurately and provides the writers of the New Testament with much of their Christology. In fact, the very title that Jesus used most often of himself, the Son of Man, comes directly from Enoch. It doesn't come from the book of Daniel like theologians claim. In the book of Daniel, that's the only reference that you'll find in the Old Testament where that phrase is used, a son of man. And that phrase is not used as a title, as a proper title, but as a descriptor. I saw one who was like a son of man, is what Daniel says. So in other words, that term son of man is being used in the same way that we would say, I saw someone who looked like a human being. It's not being used as a proper title. Whereas in the book of Enoch, it is a messianic title, the Son of Man. And that's the title that Jesus used of himself. And when he did so, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they knew exactly who he was claiming to be. He was claiming to be the fulfillment of the oracles of Enoch, specifically from the parables of Enoch. And they knew, and that's part of the reason why they crucified him, by the way. I am hosting a conference this summer from the 27th to the 28th of June, right here in my hometown of Bozeman, Montana. And it's going to feature presentations from myself, from David Paulides, who I'm sure many of your audience is familiar with. David Paulides does phenomenal work on the missing 411 subject, and also Sasquatch, and he's a phenomenal researcher, and David will be joining me. I'm also going to be joined by Congressman Eric Burleson. He's going to be speaking at the conference. Congressman Burleson is at the center of the fight for UFO disclosure in Congress. He's a member of both the UAP caucus and the committee that's been holding the hearings in Congress, and we're going to have a fantastic conversation, me and Eric, and me and Congressman Burleson, and we are going to discuss many different facets of the UAP phenomenon, what's going on in Congress. By the way, Burleson actually hired David Grush, the whistleblower David Grush. So Grush actually works for Burleson. Now that's part of a strategy to keep Grush, to renew his security clearance, and there's a whole very, very, very intelligent program underway with Congressman Burleson and Grush and the efforts in Congress. So we're going to be talking about all of that. And we're going to have some more guest speakers, such as yourself. You and I are going to have a conversation at the conference about various topics. So it's going to be really exciting. My friend Taylor Welch from the Deep End podcast is coming. Keith from End Times Productions, the YouTube channel End Times Productions, is coming. We're going to all have conversations on stage about various topics. And some other guest speakers will also be there. I've got some people in the works who I haven't been able to announce yet, but there's very interesting potential speakers are going to be added to the docket very soon. So this is going to be a very entertaining and informative conference. Again, it's from the 27th to the 28th of June, and Bozeman, Montana is absolutely gorgeous in June. And we are the gateway to Yellowstone National Park out here. So it's a great opportunity for people to come vacation in Bozeman, go to Yellowstone, go up to Glacier National Park up north, and come and spend time with us at Nefcon. And the conference, by the way, is called Nefcon, and you can get tickets to Nefcon at alberinoevents.com. alberinoevents.com. I'm looking forward to seeing you out here.